Good evening. I'm Jason Harper, and I'm the superintendent of the schools here in Rochelle. I put together this PowerPoint presentation with a little voiceover explanation to help our community, parents, students, and anybody else who's interested to learn a little bit more about a presentation I gave to the District 231 School Board on Tuesday, February 9th, in regards to a transition to academic attendance centers next year as opposed to neighborhood schools. So the purpose of this presentation is to just share some of the reasoning for the recommendation to the board, go through kind of the problems and things that have led us to this situation, potential solution, and give an idea about the timeline for us moving forward. At any time, you can press pause and fast forward, whatever you want to do to parts of this presentation that interest you. And also don't forget that on our district Facebook page and our district website, we also have other resources that'll help walk you through this presentation, including a shorter video and the PowerPoint slides without my voiceover. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and talk a little bit about the problem that the district is facing and the recommendation that I presented to the board today for how we should go about implementing our educational programs for next year. So the problem at hand here is that next year in 2021-22, so the year that will start up here in August of 2021, May School will only be half full. And by half full, I mean we'll be running at 50% capacity. Typically, our neighborhood schools, Tilton, Central, Lincoln, and May, all have 2 sections each or 2 classrooms each at kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And right now, based on projections and what we know about students in seats and our kindergartners to come in, May School will only have 6 of its 12 classrooms full next year. And so if you're a community member or parent, you might be wondering, how do we get to this point? And so the 2 major drivers of May School being open at potentially 50% next year would be our lower district enrollments, and that more families are choosing dual language programming. And these projections or these trends continue to project forward going into not only next school year, but school years beyond. So for a little bit more information, I have a graph here on this slide to show you exactly what's been going on with our enrollments. As you can see, there's been a pretty sharp decline. If you're like me and you've been in the community for the last 25 years or so, you can see what's happened with our enrollments here. We've been pretty consistently between 1,700 and 1,800 kids for a long, long time. And then after the Great Recession, you can start to see a pretty sharp decline. Our average class sizes up until 2013, so kindergartners across all grade levels, across all buildings, or 4th grade or 5th grade, whatever it is, we've tended to average in around 190 students per grade. And so last year, the kindergartners that we have in our the kindergartners we have in our seats right now, we only have 141 kindergartners, and next year we're going to be about 20 students lower. We're projecting at 120. So if you press pause here, you can kind of really acclimate yourself to the graph and get an idea about where our enrollments have been going over the last 25 years or so. The second big variable that's been going on, not only are we getting fewer and fewer students to come into our grade levels each year, but more and more families in our Rochelle community are self-selecting or choosing to go into the dual language program. The dual language program right now is at Central School and at Lincoln School, and it's been around for 5 years. So I show you in this graph here going back to 2017-18, when it was only 2 classes at Central. You can see that more students than not were on that red line. About 2/3 were going into monolingual programming, and 1/3 at Central roughly was in the dual language program. And that continued for the next 2 years, as dual language was only at Central School. But then in 2020, 2021, you can see that we have a kind of a role reversal here. And we're projected to have the same kind of trend next year as well. And the majority of our students, the majority of our incoming kindergartners, are choosing to go into the dual language program. And so again, we've had 3 years of waiting lists in 2017, 2018, and 2019. So we opened up 2 more sections. And because of that interest in parents being able to self-select and choose where to go, again, we've seen more and more students opt into dual language programming. So before I get into the recommendation about what I think would be a good path for the district to be on going forward, I do want to explain the difference between neighborhood schools and attendance centers. Neighborhood schools are the model that we follow right now. Neighborhood schools are when one neighborhood school or one school serves all the students from a particular boundary. Sometimes they're referred to as boundary schools. And so those of you in Rochelle know that based on your physical address, you go to a certain school. Those students who live in a certain area go to Lincoln, go to May, Central, Tilton, and so on. Attendance centers are a flip on that concept, and there's many districts who use the neighborhood school model, and there's just as many roughly who use the attendance center model. Sometimes attendance centers are called learning centers, but essentially what happens is instead of there only being a couple sections of or a couple classes of each grade level at various schools in the community, all of the grade levels, so for example, all of the third graders aren't at 4 different schools. All of the third graders go to one building, and that building is referred to as an attendance center. Historically, Rochelle has always used the neighborhood school model. And so what's interesting in the last couple of years is that dual language and monolingual programming have been options for parents to choose. And because of that choice, we're right now operating somewhere in the middle between a neighborhood school model and an attendance center model. And I think that'll make sense when you look at this chart. So on the bottom of the chart, I have our current grade levels. So our current 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st kindergarten. And then I've added the projected kindergartners for next year. And so the blue line represents all of those students who go to their own neighborhood school. And the red line represents all of those students who live in a certain boundary, but for a variety of reasons, they go to a different neighborhood school. And you can see that historically, as low as 5 or 6%, or on the flip side, 95 to 94%, 90% or more of our students attended their own neighborhood school. But because of the dual language model and parents being able to self-select what program they want to go into and have a little bit more of a voice in terms of what their preference is for the school their children will attend as part of the mono program or the dual program, then we've seen a flip again of this. And so right now, more than half of our students clearly the majority happens to be 53% over the last couple of years are not attending their neighborhood school. So right now we have a mixed model. And to be quite honest, it's just not working. And that's part of the problems really that's led to May School only being half full next year. And so what I propose going forward and what I talked to the board about tonight is ultimately a recommendation to realign just our kindergarten through 5th grade buildings to an attendance center model. And you can see on this slide here, Lincoln School would continue to house the preschool programs. Our pre-K programs would not change at all. They'd stay in the red pod at Lincoln, and there'd be no change for preschoolers. But the rest of the building would only serve kindergarten and 1st grade students across the district. Central would house all of our 2nd and 3rd grade students, and Tilton would house all of our 4th and 5th grade students. May School for next year would have no students in attendance. You may be wondering as a parent community member, and I know our board's definitely wondering, what does this mean with our staff? Our teachers, of course, are very concerned with this as well. And so one of the points of emphasis I want to make is that this isn't going to cause a reduction in force for our teachers. We still want to maintain the number of teachers that we've had in the past. We want to maintain appropriate class sizes that are beneficial for students and that are going to allow them to be in a setting that allows them to maximize their growth and learning opportunities. And ultimately, we'd shake things out kind of this way. The graph or table on the left shows what we're in right now, the 2021-22 school year, and then the graph on the right, the table on the right would show what 21-22 would look like. And ultimately, we would have the almost the exact same student to staff ratio when we think about our grade school teachers, our kind of general grade school teachers, our special education, our reading specialists, and our ESL teachers. So really what the proposal here is not a big cut, not a big change in terms of staff to student ratios or services or things of that nature. It's really just taking what we have right now and reallocating it over 3 buildings as opposed to 4. And we think that there's some clear benefits in that. So next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of the transition to attendance centers and a little bit more detail behind the plan. First and foremost, why would we do this? What are the benefits of attendance centers, and why might it be a time to make this transition? So I've listed 4 reasons here that I think are the most important reasons. And first and foremost, I think this will lead to improved educational outcomes for our students. Secondly, I think it's beneficial for our teachers and administrators. I think it's going to allow for increased collaboration amongst teachers who are teaching the same subjects and the same grade levels. I think thirdly, it will allow the district to more equitably distribute and allocate our resources across the district, regardless of a boundary school or a physical address. And then I think the fourth benefit is an improved financial outcome for the district and our taxpayers. I talked a little bit about the improved educational and equity outcomes. So what I mean by that is I think this is going to lead for our teachers to have more opportunities for them to collaborate and work together, for them to share ideas and resources right across the hallway as opposed to, at different schools. I think it's a big opportunity for us to maximize the programming options. There's a lot of different ways that we can intervene and help target students who are maybe struggling or doing well, depending on kind of where they're at with each of the various subjects that we're teaching. It allows for maybe some more targeted opportunities where there's more students to be grouped and to work together. As I mentioned, it's a more equitable distribution of our funds. It allows every kind of student who's a 3rd grader, 1st grader, kindergarten, regardless of where you live, access to the same teachers who are all on the same page. And I think that's a great thing for our community. And then a special benefit, I think, out of this for teachers especially is that as we close down May School, or May School has fewer and fewer classrooms, there's going to be a lot of movement, and there's going to be a big ripple effect. And teachers are going to constantly be moving one grade level to the other or whatever it may be, and they're constantly going to be relearning a new system, a new school, new students, new grade level. And I think this provides the opportunity for a little bit less movement. And so these are just a handful of the pieces that I thought would be a improved outcome for our students in our community. The financial aspect of this potential decision is one that obviously needs to be considered as well. The district and the Board of Education, one of our goals is to be, good and appropriate stewards of taxpayer funds. And right now in year 1, very conservatively, we estimate and show that there's $200,000 of savings just in next year alone. After that, we will see $300,000 of savings from that year going forward. So after 2 years, it would be a $500,000 savings for the district, and so on and so forth as every year goes on under this model. And so one of the things that we're especially aware of is that in Illinois, there's a new base pay minimum for teachers. And so that's going to go up to $40,000 for salary and pension payments from the district. And then our non-certified staff members will be slowly moving towards $15 new minimum wage as set by the state of Illinois. Both of those things are good things in terms of our staff members' compensation, but the reality of these coming mandates in terms of compensation mean that the district will have roughly about $1 million of new expenses in compensation for our staff members and teachers alone. And so we need to do some things now on the front end to position ourselves to be successful and to make that transition later. And so I would much rather do some things like this that allow us to reallocate our resources and place people in different places than, in a couple of years, be cutting teachers or coming back to the community for a referendum or whatever it may be to try to fill some of those gaps in terms of our expenditures. So those are a little bit more details about the financial pieces. Now, downsides. I don't want to gloss over the potential downsides either. First and foremost, if I'm a parent listening to this, I'm thinking, well, the beauty of the neighborhood school is that I could drop my students off just at one school and I didn't have to race around at 8 o'clock in the morning to multiple schools or do the exact same thing at 3 o'clock. You might also be saying to yourself, I put my kids on the bus and they all go to whatever my neighborhood school is, and that's just the way it works, and it's less stress on me. And so one of the things that we feel strongly about is, since the school district is basically seeing right now already 50% of our kids go to a different school outside of their boundary, as I already mentioned in this presentation, and the fact that we had to greatly modify our transportation process for the pandemic, we've actually instituted or implemented, a shuttle system in which parents and buses can drop kids off at any school that we have, and we'll shuttle them around the district. And so it's been a successful way to manage students kind of going to different schools, and also managing our limitations in terms of 50 kids on a bus for the pandemic. And so we feel confident that we can continue to use our schools as transportation hubs. And yes, it will lead to a shuttling process, but we've already been doing that. May have to do it more, but we already have a system in place that we feel confident can handle this type of transportation and moving of students around the district. The second point I have here is obviously student and family changes. Students and families will constantly now be, changing schools every couple of years, which is different than our current model. This allows students to get familiar with the procedures and the layout of a building, get used to seeing the teachers that they're going to have in the future. It also allows families to get more comfortable and have more continuity in a building. We understand that that will change. We're open to maybe innovative ideas on how to help reduce the anxiety, the confusion, the stress of changing, a couple times during a student's elementary process, as opposed to right now. We know that teachers are going to have to pack up their rooms potentially. Some of our teachers, we know that teachers will be moving buildings and, that type of thing. And so in the short term, between now and August and in the fall of next year, we'll have a lot of teacher movement. And so just in general, teacher changes. And that causes stress, and we hope that in the long run it provides more stability for our district, as I kind of already talked about. But we know in the short term there's definitely going to be a lot more stress. There's going to be limited space at Tilton. We know that Tilton and May are two of our smallest buildings, and so Tilton just isn't as big as Central and the new Lincoln building, and so that's a space limitation that we're going to have to work on. For the district, maintaining a vacant building in May School can be a challenge. We're going to have to make sure that we do our best to maintain that facility and the grounds. And then, of course, there's the element of losing a piece of Rochelle history. This would be a big change, and not one that we would take on lightly. There's many people in our community who have grown up, went to May. Maybe their kids now go to May. We have a legacy from the May family who have bestowed and given this property and eventually the naming of the school for the Mays, and we're respectful of that piece. And so again, it's not something that we really take on lightly. I do want to touch on some additional information about the recommendation as well. One of the short-term benefits of attendance centers, and I want to take my time and make sure I explain this correctly, is that right now we're really handicapped compared to some other districts in terms of allowing our students to go full time. And so as we plan for next year, we also plan for COVID mitigation strategies to still be in place for next year. And so right now we're really running into a problem in that we cannot dedicate one grade level teacher to a certain grade level. For example, one fifth grade teacher teaching all the remote students from that grade level, while all the other teachers teach the in-person students. And the reason why we can't do that is because all the teachers are around at different buildings. And if they were all together in one building, we could dedicate that one teacher to teach all remote learners. which would be nice for our remote learners because they would have one person that they're going to. They'd all be operating in the same way. It would allow for a more consistent schedule, a lot more consistency for our remote learners, but also for those students who elect to come back and their families who elect to come back to in-person learning. This would allow us to elongate the day to what we think could be a full day of instruction for next year. And so this would allow us to really better serve both of the populations by not trying to do both at once for every single teacher. And so teachers need to have a plan period, a lunch, and they need to be able to work with their remote learners. Right now during our model this year and next year would allow one person to take on all of those. So like I said at the bottom of the slide, with neighborhood schools, we can't do this this year. But one of the incidental short-term benefits during this COVID process with all the COVID, assuming all the COVID mitigation strategies are the exact same for next year, then we would be able to elongate our day and allow kids to come back full-time in person, which is a primary goal for us to get to next year. Some other pieces here. I know there's a lot going on the slide, but teacher association, we've been working with the teachers, conversations back and forth in terms of working with association leadership. We want to continue to do that by having feedback meetings, and we understand that our teachers we'll have ways to improve this recommendation. We've already, like I said, heard from the association leadership and, continue to want to partner with them. Transportation, I already talked about that in a little bit more detail, but we'd like to use our same approach. Special education services, we continue to obviously keep our special education learners in mind, students with special needs, and we'll continue to work with the OCEC to maintain the services we've had. Lester Davis and the maintenance crew will be very busy this summer, getting all the rooms kind of reassigned and moving from one building to the next. It will be a large endeavor, logistical endeavor, but we're ready to do that. And then one of the things we just found out from the Illinois State Board of Education and the people who oversee our hub program funds is that we will be able to allow for hub services at all three of the current or proposed elementary schools for next year. So under the current proposal recommendation, Lincoln as pre-K through 1, Central through 2nd and 3rd, and Tilton through 4th and 5th, and of course the middle school. All of those schools would be able to receive some of the hub funds for after-school services for those students who qualify. Right now, Tilton receives no services, and we'd be able to still serve all of our students and extend that into every building. You may be thinking to yourself at home, who else uses this? Who doesn't use this? What type of, kind of regional thought is there in this process? And so I've done some research, and I just wanted to show you kind of all the different approaches. In the third column, the NS stands for neighborhood schools. The AC stands for attendance centers, obviously. And then I just kind of gave a little bit of notes. What I thought was important to consider on this slide, and why I present it to the board and to the public, is it's important to consider how many students we have in our buildings. You might wonder, Jason, you presented earlier and our enrollment numbers were around 1,400, and now you're presenting a number that's 1,623. I do want to emphasize that I got this information from the Illinois Interactive Report Card. So 2 things to note. One is that this data on enrollment is from last year. So the numbers run kind of a year behind, and also it includes our preschool students. So that would account for the difference in kind of the 2 enrollment pieces that I've already given you. On the right-hand side, you can see there's a column here that shows how many buildings each district operates for preschool through 8th grade. And what I found interesting here is we're kind of in this pocket of 1,600 to 1,700 kids. There's some schools we're kind of right on that borderline again, and you can kind of see why we're on that 50-50 model. But in general, you can see that the school districts that are roughly our size, most of them operate only 4 buildings, 3 or 4 buildings. And that's kind of part and parcel of this recommendation, is for us as a district to get to that point. So I hope this slide gives you some information about where we stand with some of the schools in our region. Last in this section of the presentation, why close May and not a different building? Of course, Lincoln is our newest building. I know the community members know that. Lincoln and Central are our biggest buildings in terms of the number of classrooms. Each have 20 plus. May School, as I've already mentioned, is already half full. Tilton has 2 more classrooms than May. And of course, it's where we house our district kitchen. So kind of all of these variables combined and what we're seeing at May in general has led me to this recommendation. So lastly, I want to talk to you a little bit, or just talk about the timeline going forward. One of the important things to note here is that we obviously want parent feedback. We know that the educational process is 3 parts, triangle we sometimes refer to it as, and that's the partnership between the student, the educators at the school, and of course the parents. And so we're seeking out parent feedback. The easiest and most time-friendly way for you to do that is, set up a phone call with me. You can email me. We can email back and forth, a phone call, whatever is convenient. I've got my contact information here below, but we're also going to do a presentation, a public presentation on Thursday, February 11th. That's in a couple days here at 5 p.m. at Lincoln. We'd like to have our English presentation at 5 p.m. and then our Spanish presentation at 7 p.m. I apologize for that. So both of these meetings would take place on Thursday, February 11th, and we would talk through this process and again walk through actually this identical presentation and answer questions and obviously hear some feedback. We're going to continue to work with the teachers. I presented to the board and wanted the Board of Education and our teachers and staff members to understand that obviously we know this is a huge change for our district, and we need to make sure we provide some opportunities for teachers to provide feedback and in ways in which this plan and recommendation could be approved. So that's a little bit of information about how we'll just handle the internal conversations with teachers and staff. So then back in March, after we have some public meetings, however many of those that we need, and individual conversations with parents and community members, we'll share that information back with the Board of Education, so that they understand more of the details about our public and how this has gone over. And then, either way, the board's going to decide in December. The board needs to make a decision because obviously we have quite a bit of work to do if it's approved. And if it's not approved, then everything will remain the same. And we will have made the recommendation, and we'll just continue to go forward with the neighborhood schools, and May School will continue to serve at only 50% capacity. So if the board were to approve, then we would start the nuts and bolts process of implementing the recommendation as early as May. Teachers would begin the process of cleaning up their room, and we'd continue to communicate with parents and students about the change that's going to happen for next year. We will go through the process over the summer of moving students around. We would obviously need to make some changes to the registration process now that it gets a little bit more complicated about parents registering across multiple buildings. And then in August, we would want to implement this new structure, and we would make those changes accordingly. So that's the timeline going forward. Again, please reach out if you have any questions. If you're still listening to this presentation, I thank you for opening it up. And I guess, last but not least, I know that this is an emotional decision. Closing down a school or temporarily no longer serving students at a school is a big decision. And we don't come to this decision lightly, or this recommendation lightly, excuse me. And it would, of course, be my preference to never have gotten to this point. If we had the number of students to fill out those classrooms at May, then we wouldn't be doing this recommendation. So ultimately, we do think it's in the best interest of the district. I think it's in the best interest of the district and the community to make this change. And I think it's an opportune moment to make such a change. And but I also, at the same time, I understand that there's going to be some folks who are angry about this, and we'll continue to work with all the stakeholders in our community to make sure at the very least everybody understands how we've gotten here and why this recommendation is taking place. So thank you again for your time, and reach out if you have any questions.